The air in the Thorne plantation's main house was thick with the scent of rust and damp rot. It was a smell that clung to the peeling wallpaper and settled in the heavy, velvet curtains, a constant reminder that for all its grand, antebellum facade, the house was dying from the inside out. For 20-year-old Eliza, recently assigned to the main house from the cotton fields, this decay was a metaphor for everything she was about to face. Her new master, Mr. Silas Thorne, was rumored to be the true source of the house's sickness. Eliza had been given the position of head housekeeper and cook. The previous one, an older woman named Margot, had vanished weeks ago. Her disappearance was a topic of hushed whispers among the other enslaved people, a silent, collective fear that hung just beneath the humid summer air. Some said she had simply run away. Others whispered that she had displeased Mr. Thorne one too many times. But the most common and most chilling story was that Margot had simply ceased to be. The day began with a grim introduction. Mr. Thorne was a man carved from granite and bile. His face was a perpetually sour mask, and his eyes, a watery blue, held a glint of constant suspicion. He watched Eliza from his armchair, the leather groaning under his weight as he gestured to the kitchen. "You are to prepare all my meals," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "And only my meals. No one else is to touch my food, do you understand?" "Yes, Master Thorne," Eliza replied, her voice soft and even. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs, but she kept her face impassive. She had learned early on that a placid expression was her best defense. "Good. My constitution is a delicate one. I have a sensitive stomach. I trust that you will be careful." The word careful hung in the air, heavy with a double meaning she understood all too well. It was a warning, a test. He was watching her, waiting for a single misstep, a grain of salt too much, a moment of inattention. Eliza nodded and moved to the kitchen. It was an enormous space, filled with a massive cast-iron stove and a long, rough-hewn table. It was here, in the heart of the home, that the tension was most palpable. The atmosphere felt charged, as if a storm was about to break. As she walked, her bare feet made no sound on the worn floorboards, but her senses were on high alert. She started with simple tasks, preparing breakfast, a meager portion of eggs and bacon. As she worked, she noticed things. The pantry was strangely disorganized. There were certain jars filled with dried herbs and spices that were pushed far back, covered in a thin layer of dust. The most jarring detail, however, was a small, crudely carved wooden bird sitting on a shelf above the stove. It was a simple thing, a finch, but its presence felt wrong, out of place among the kitchen tools. It was too personal, too delicate for a man like Silas Thorne. She turned to a young boy, a scullery worker named Leo, who was scrubbing a pot by the sink. He was no older than 12, with wide, frightened eyes. "Who put that there?" Eliza asked quietly, gesturing with her head toward the bird. Leo flinched, his eyes darting to the doorway, a gesture so ingrained it was like a tick. "Margot. She carved it for her little niece before she went away." "She went away," Eliza repeated, her voice a flat statement. Leo looked at her, his expression a mixture of fear and something else, a shared, silent understanding. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Master Thorne said she was careless. He said she mixed up his medicines and his stomach went sour. Said she's gone south to the coast, to live with her sister." He paused, then his eyes flickered to the floor. "But we all know no one goes south. Not from here." The subtext was clear. The coast was a euphemism for a final, terrible end. A chill ran down Eliza's spine, but she kept her hands moving, cracking the eggs into a bowl. She had to appear focused, dedicated to her task. This was not a story of ghosts or phantoms, but of a very real and present danger. She was in a house where people disappeared, and a man obsessed with being poisoned had placed her directly in the line of fire. As she cooked, she could feel Mr. Thorne's eyes on her from the dining room. He didn't eat in the kitchen. He preferred to observe from a distance, a silent judge of her every movement. It was a test, she knew, a trial by fire, or in this case, a trial by skillet. The morning passed slowly. By noon she had prepared and served his meager breakfast and was now beginning to consider what to make for lunch. She needed to venture into the pantry again. This time, as she reached for a bag of flour, her hand brushed against a small loose floorboard behind a stack of crates. It was almost invisible, but the slight give beneath her fingers was enough to catch her attention. Curiosity, a dangerous emotion, gnawed at her. She glanced toward the dining room. The low rumble of Mr. Thorne's voice indicated he was speaking with one of the overseers. It was the only moment of privacy she would get. Kneeling, she pried the board up with her fingernails. Tucked into the dusty recess was a small, leather-bound book, a ledger. Its cover was blank, and it felt old, its pages stiff with age. She quickly tucked it into the pocket of her apron, her heart hammering. The risk was immense. If she was caught with this, her fate would be sealed. But the need to know, to understand Margot's story, was overwhelming. The ledger felt like a piece of the puzzle, a key to a door she didn't even know existed. The rest of the day was a blur of calculated movements. She prepared a simple lunch of stewed chicken and vegetables, making sure to season it lightly, just as she imagined a man with a delicate constitution would prefer. She didn't dare look at the ledger. It was a burning secret against her thigh, a dangerous weight. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, casting long, menacing shadows across the plantation, she prepared Mr. Thorne's dinner. As she worked, she felt a new kind of fear, not of a phantom, but of a man's cold, calculating cruelty. The scent of rust and rot had a new companion, the smell of suspicion, thick and palpable. She served the meal, her hands steady despite the tremor in her heart. Mr. Thorne watched her, his expression unreadable. He picked up his fork, took a small taste, and then another. The silence was deafening. He didn't look pleased or displeased. He just ate. As he finished, he set his fork down with a sharp clink. "You may go," he said, his voice as flat as ever. Eliza curtsied and left the dining room, the weight of the day pressing down on her. The ledger was still in her pocket, a constant reminder of the secrets hidden in the house. She had survived her first day. She had passed the test. But what was the true nature of the poison Mr. Thorne feared? Was it a physical substance, or something far more sinister, something that Margot had been trying to expose? She found a quiet corner in the servants' quarters, hidden from the other enslaved people, and pulled out the small book. It was not a ledger of accounts. On the first page, scrawled in a shaky but determined hand, were the words, "He is a man of secrets, and his secrets are poison. They will kill him, just not in the way he expects." The final line sent a shiver through her. Margot had not been a victim of poisoning. She had been the one preparing it. Not for him to ingest, but for the world to see. The poisoned feast was not food. It was something else entirely. Eliza realized she was now a part of this dark, macabre history, and the finch on the shelf, the loose floorboard, and the strange, haunting words were all part of a trail Margot had left for someone else to follow. Someone like her. The ledger felt like a living thing in Eliza's pocket, a weight of both immense risk and undeniable purpose. The words Margot had written, "He is a man of secrets, and his secrets are poison," replayed in her mind. They were a challenge and a map. Eliza knew she couldn't trust anyone yet. The plantation was a panopticon, every corner, every whispered word, possibly under Mr. Thorne's gaze. That night, after the work was done, and the other house servants had retreated to their crowded, stifling quarters, Eliza found a moment of solitude. She knelt by the wall she shared with the main kitchen, the one with the loose floorboard, and pulled out the small book. By the dim moonlight filtering through a grimy window, she began to read. The first few pages were not a narrative but a series of cryptic entries, dates followed by a single word or a phrase. July 14th, Belladonna. July 18th, Henry arrived, the man with the gilded tongue. July 21st, the creek runs red. August 5th, the ledger is empty. He is a ghost. Eliza's brow furrowed. The entries were a puzzle. Who was Henry? What had happened at the creek? And who was the ghost? The last entry, dated just a few days before Margot's disappearance, was the most unsettling. The poison is the truth. He fears it more than arsenic. She heard a footfall in the hallway and her heart leaped into her throat. She slammed the book shut and slipped it back into her apron just as a tall, lanky figure appeared in the doorway. It was Leo, the young scullery boy from the kitchen. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Eliza, I saw you leave the quarters." Eliza straightened up, keeping her face neutral. "Just needed a breath of air. It's hot." Leo didn't move. He looked at her, then to her apron and back to her face. "You found it, didn't you? The book?" A bead of sweat trickled down Eliza's temple. She didn't lie. She couldn't, not to him. "What do you know about it, Leo?" He stepped into the room, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Margot told me. She said if anything ever happened, someone would have to finish what she started. She said to watch for the new one, the one who wasn't afraid to look." He gestured to the wall. "She called this the whispering wall, said the secrets of this house were soaked into the wood. She would sit here scribbling in that book, listening to everything. Master Thorne's rages, the arguments, the comings and goings, she wrote it all down." Eliza felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone. "What secrets, Leo?" "The people who go missing," he said, his voice barely audible. "Not just here, the folks from town, the ones who come to do business with him. They come, and then they're gone. The law, they say it's just runaways or thieves or debtors. But Margot, she kept a record, she kept track." "Is that what happened to Margot?" Eliza asked. "Did she try to expose him?" Leo shook his head, a single, sorrowful shake. "She never got the chance. He found out she was writing, not what she was writing, but that she was writing at all. He got paranoid. Thought she was trying to poison him. That's why he's like he is with you now. He's testing you to see if you'll make the same mistake she did. He believes the poison is in the food." Margot knew the real poison was the truth. The conversation was a fragile thread between them, one that could break with a single sound. Eliza realized the full weight of her situation. She wasn't just a housekeeper. She was Margot's chosen successor, an unwitting participant in a silent war for the truth. Over the next few days, their secret alliance grew. They communicated in veiled phrases, a glance here, a slight movement there. Eliza continued her duties, serving Mr. Thorne his meals with meticulous care. She was the picture of a dutiful, careful servant. But in the stolen moments, she and Leo pieced together the fragments of Margot's ledger. They found more entries, a list of names, followed by dates. Names of local merchants, a land speculator, a woman from a nearby farm. All had vanished, and each disappearance coincided with an entry in the book. September 1st. The grain merchant, Elias Cole, came for a meeting. He questioned the ledger. A week later, he was declared a runaway. His wife says he never would have left. September 15th, the river saw him and the overseer, Jedediah, moving a body, not a runaway, buried under the willows. October 2nd, the ghost. Mr. Thorne calls him that. He's the one who does the dirty work, not Jedediah. Jedediah just helps clean up. The ledger revealed a pattern of cold, calculated murder. Mr. Thorne wasn't just a paranoid tyrant. He was a serial killer, using his power and the isolated nature of the plantation to make inconvenient people disappear. The poisoned feast was not a metaphor for a single deadly meal. It was the slow, meticulous documentation of a man's evil deeds. The most recent entry was about a man named Henry, the one with the gilded tongue, the one Margot suspected. The entry was a question. Who is he? A partner or a dupe? The question was answered a few days later when a carriage pulled up the long, dusty drive to the main house. A man stepped out, impeccably dressed, with a charming smile and eyes that held the same glint of cruel calculation as Mr. Thorne's. It was Henry. Eliza watched him from the kitchen window, her heart sinking. Henry was a partner. Margot's poison was a list of names, a history of murder. The stakes had just been raised, and the feast was about to begin. Henry was every bit the man Margot's ledger had described. He spoke with a syrupy drawl, his words laced with false charm and an undercurrent of something sharp and dangerous. He called Mr. Thorne Silas, my old friend, but his smiles never quite reached his eyes. For his part, Mr. Thorne seemed to relax around Henry, a rare and unsettling sight. They spent hours in the study, doors closed, their voices a low murmur that occasionally rose into sharp staccato arguments before settling back into a conspiratorial hum. Eliza and Leo watched from the shadows, their silent communication a lifeline. They learned Henry's purpose quickly. He was a land speculator, working with Thorne on a large-scale deal. The ledger entries about the disappeared merchants and landowners made a chilling kind of sense now. Mr. Thorne was using murder to acquire land, to clear away anyone who stood in the way of a large, lucrative enterprise. The ghost Margot had mentioned was not a spectre, but a method, a way of making people disappear without a trace. Henry was his accomplice, an urban professional who handled the paperwork, the fake sales, and the public-facing lies. The days passed, each one more fraught with tension. Eliza continued her duties, her every movement scrutinized by both Mr. Thorne and now Henry. Henry had a habit of appearing in the kitchen when she least expected it, asking casual questions about her background, her family, her time on the plantation. He was charming, but she knew his questions were not born of genuine curiosity. He was assessing her, measuring her. One afternoon, Eliza was sent to retrieve a special bottle of wine from the cellar. The cellar was a cold, musty space, its stone walls slick with condensation. The wine racks were dusty, but in a small hidden corner she saw it. A different kind of rack, and a series of jars, each one unlabeled. The contents were dried herbs and powders. She had learned a little about natural remedies from the older women on the plantation. The smell of some of the herbs was acrid and familiar, like the peculiar, lingering scent she had noticed upon her arrival. This was Margot's stash. Margot had used this same herb, a mild sedative, to help the other slaves with their aches and pains. But these jars were different. Eliza reached out, her fingers trembling, and opened one of the jars. The powder was a pale, chalky white. It smelled of bitter almonds, a scent she had only heard about in hushed warnings. It was a potent poison. Mr. Thorne had kept it there, a cruel and twisted collection. He had told her that Margot had mixed up his medicines. The implication was that Margot had been a blundering idiot. But Eliza now understood the truth. Margot had been an herbalist, a healer. The master's paranoia was so deep he had convinced himself she was trying to poison him, a twisted justification for his own actions. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Panic seized her. She quickly resealed the jar and moved away, her heart pounding. It was Leo. He was carrying a sack of potatoes, his young face etched with worry. "He's asking for you," Leo whispered, his eyes wide. "Henry in the study. He's asking where you are." "I was getting the wine," she said, her voice strained. She pointed to the bottle in her hand. "Tell him I was just finishing up." Leo nodded and hurried back upstairs. Eliza took a deep, shuddering breath. The air in the cellar felt colder now, filled with the ghosts of Mr. Thorne's crimes. He didn't just murder for land. He murdered with a kind of clinical, cold-blooded precision. When she returned, she found Mr. Thorne and Henry in the study, hunched over a large map spread out on the desk. They both looked up as she entered, their expressions unreadable. Henry's eyes lingered on her, a strange, assessing look. "Ah, there you are, Eliza," Henry said smoothly. "My apologies. I just needed to ask Mr. Thorne a question about the wine. He's particular about his vintages." Eliza nodded, her face a mask of subservience. "Yes, sir, he is. And you handle all of his meals?" Henry asked, his voice casual. "The preparation, the serving, everything?" "Yes, sir," she said, her voice a near whisper. Henry smiled, but it was a cold, empty gesture. "Good, good. A man as valuable as Mr. Thorne needs to be watched over carefully. He is a very wealthy man, you see. A man with many jealous rivals." The implication was clear. They were not just partners in a criminal enterprise. They were each other's greatest threat. The paranoia that drove Mr. Thorne was a double-edged sword. He was testing Eliza to see if she was a threat, but he was also terrified of being poisoned by his own accomplice. The poisoned feast had a new dimension. It was not just a historical record of murder. It was a deadly game of trust between two men, with Eliza caught in the middle. She left the study, the map, and their hushed conversation, a new, terrifying puzzle. She had to find a way to get the ledger to someone outside the plantation, someone who could expose them. But she was trapped, watched, and now she had a new enemy in the house, the man with the gilded tongue, who saw in her a potential weak link, a servant who knew too much. The game had begun, and she was playing for her life. The days that followed were a torment of hidden anxieties and calculated risks. Henry's presence on the plantation was a constant pressure, a heavy, silent scrutiny that followed Eliza everywhere. She and Leo continued to communicate in hushed tones, stealing moments in the kitchen or by the woodpile to share what they had learned. The ledger was their most valuable and most dangerous possession. Margot's entries became more desperate, more pointed. October 2nd. They are preparing to sell off the Miller farm. No one has seen Mr. Miller in weeks. Henry said he ran to Canada. A lie. I saw his grave marker by the creek, a small rock with his initials etched in it. The ghost is in on it. October 5th. Found the ghost's ledger. He doesn't write, he sketches. Horrible pictures of what happened, of the bodies. His name is Jeremiah. He's the one who does the digging. October 7th. They know. Not the what, but the that. They know I am a threat. I have to find a way to get the truth out. The poison will be my downfall, but it will be his too. The entries were a chilling chronicle of the true nature of Mr. Thorne's operation. He didn't just kill, he conspired with a man who dealt in public lies and another who dug the secret graves. The ghost was a fellow enslaved man, a silent accomplice forced into the role of a gravedigger. It was a new layer of horror. The cruelty was not just in the killing, but in the brutal complicity it forced upon others. Eliza knew she had to find Jeremiah. He was a piece of the puzzle, a living witness. She learned from Leo that Jeremiah was a man of few words, a withdrawn figure who worked mostly in the stables and the outbuildings. He was feared by the other enslaved people, who saw him as a harbinger of death, a man who saw too much. One rainy afternoon, the air thick with the smell of wet earth, Eliza was sent to deliver a message to the stables. The rain was a blessing, providing a cover of noise and a reason for people to be indoors. She found Jeremiah in the tack room, polishing a leather saddle with slow, deliberate movements. He was a large man, with broad shoulders and eyes that held a deep, unreadable sadness. "Jeremiah," Eliza said softly. He didn't look up. "Leave me be, girl." "I know about the creek," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I know about the ledger. Margot left it. I know what you do." Jeremiah froze. The rag in his hand stilled. He slowly raised his head, his eyes meeting hers. They were not the eyes of a cold-blooded killer. They were the eyes of a man tormented. "You know nothing," he said, his voice a low growl. "You know what they let you see. You don't know the price." "I know the price of silence," Eliza countered, her courage bolstered by the sheer terror of the situation. "Margot paid it with her life. I won't." He stared at her for a long moment, the silence broken only by the drumming of the rain on the tin roof. "He has a book," Jeremiah said at last, his voice a hoarse whisper. "A different one. He forces me to sketch what I do for him. The bodies, the locations. It's a game, a sick game. He likes to have the proof, to hold it over my head, over Henry's head, over Margot's." Eliza felt a sickening twist in her stomach. Mr. Thorne had a ledger of his own, a record of his crimes, drawn by the hand of a man he had psychologically tortured into being his accomplice. The real poison was not just the truth, but the evidence of it. "Where is it?" she asked. Jeremiah shook his head. "Hidden, in the study. He keeps it close, no one knows where." He looked at her, his expression a mixture of warning and despair. Margot thought she could beat him. She thought she was smart. She was right. She was smart enough to get me to give her a location, a piece of land, where the bodies are. But she was a fool to think he wouldn't catch on. He just played along, letting her think she was so clever, until he found out she was writing, and then she was gone. "You're next. You're too clever for your own good, just like her." Eliza's resolve hardened. She was too clever, but so was he, and so was Margot. The poisoned feast was not just the truth, it was a battle of wits. She had to find Mr. Thorne's ledger. She had to find it and find a way to expose it all. The stakes were no longer just her life, but the lives of everyone on the plantation, and the memory of the dead. The rain outside seemed to pour with a new, somber weight, as if the sky itself was weeping for the secrets buried in the mud. The discovery of Mr. Thorne's own ledger, a sick gallery of his crimes, sketched and documented by a terrified Jeremiah, added a new, terrifying dimension to Eliza's mission. The true poison was not just a list of names, but irrefutable proof, a collection of morbid trophies. Henry, his accomplice, was staying on the plantation, a silent, watchful threat. He had moved into a small guest cottage on the property, and his daily routine was predictable, giving Eliza small windows of opportunity. She knew she couldn't rush. The house was full of ears, and Mr. Thorne's paranoia was her greatest obstacle. He would often pretend to be asleep in his study, only to snap awake when a servant passed, his eyes fixed on their every movement. He had no true allies, only people he controlled through fear. That fear, Eliza realized, was also her greatest advantage. It was a suffocating pressure, but it was also a wedge that could be used to pry them apart. One afternoon, a delivery man arrived from town with supplies. He was a gruff, honest-looking man, and he seemed to know Henry. They exchanged a few quiet words. As he was leaving, Eliza, feigning to dust a railing near the front door, overheard a snippet of their conversation. "Everything's ready in town, Mr. Henry," the man said. "The papers are signed, just waiting on the final word from Mr. Thorne." "Good," Henry said, a tight, thin smile on his face. "Just a few more days." A cold dread settled in Eliza's stomach. They were getting ready to complete the land deal, to finalize their acquisition of the vanished people's property. If they succeeded, the truth would be buried forever, sealed in legal documents that would be impossible to dispute. The clock was ticking. That night, Eliza and Leo met again, under the pretense of fetching firewood from the shed. The air was cool and crisp, a welcome relief from the oppressive heat of the house. "Henry is leaving soon," Eliza said, her voice low. "I heard him. He's going to finalize everything in town. That means Thorne will be alone. He's most paranoid when he's alone." "So you go now?" Leo asked, his eyes wide with worry. "You try to find the book?" Eliza shook her head. "No. I have to wait. There has to be a distraction. Something that makes him careless. Something that makes Henry scared." The next day, as she prepared Mr. Thorne's dinner, she put her plan into motion. She wasn't going to poison him. That was too simple. It would confirm his paranoia and close off any hope of escape. She was going to poison his mind. She was going to use his own fear against him. She carefully prepared a simple soup, but as she seasoned it, she used a tiny pinch of a tasteless, odorless powder she had found in Margot's hidden jars. It was not a deadly poison. It was a mild, non-lethal sedative. It would make him drowsy, but not unconscious. It would make him feel unwell. As she served the meal, her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. Mr. Thorne ate slowly, his eyes fixed on her. She maintained her placid facade, a statue of a servant. When he finished, he didn't say a word. He just set the bowl down and retreated to his study. She waited. The house was silent. The hours stretched, each one a minute of agonizing suspense. She imagined him in his study, the mild sedative taking effect, a faint dizziness, a feeling of unease. He would think it was the food. He would think she had tried to poison him. And in his paranoia, he would act. He would call for Henry. He would accuse him. He would want to see his ledger, his proof, the evidence he held over everyone's head. And that's when she would strike. She and Leo waited in the kitchen, pretending to clean. They heard the faint sound of a bell ringing from the study. It was Mr. Thorne. "He's asking for me," Leo whispered, his face pale. "He's going to want to know what I saw, what I know." "He's going to be in a panic," Eliza said, her voice low and steady. "He'll be looking for proof. He'll be accusing Henry. He'll be too distracted to see us." Just as she predicted, Mr. Thorne was in a state of barely contained frenzy. He accused Leo of having seen something, of having conspired with Eliza. His voice was a hoarse, rattling growl. He was furious, paranoid, and most importantly, distracted. "Get out," he yelled at Leo, his voice shaking with rage. "Go find Henry. Tell him to come here at once. Tell him it's a matter of life and death." Leo, terrified, fled the room. Mr. Thorne slammed the study door shut behind him. This was their chance. This was the moment. Eliza crept to the study door, her heart a wild bird in her chest. She had one chance to find the ledger. She had to use Thorne's paranoia, his fear, to find the proof he so desperately held onto. The game had just escalated, and the next move was hers. The study was a sanctuary of a man's fears and obsessions. The air was heavy with the smell of old paper, pipe smoke, and the faint coppery tang of rust. Eliza slipped inside, her movements as silent as a shadow. Mr. Thorne was not there. The bell he had used to summon Henry lay on the floor, knocked over in his frenzy. He was likely in his bedroom, checking on his own health, consumed by the mild symptoms of the sedative she had given him. The study itself was a puzzle. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with dusty volumes on law, agriculture, and history. A heavy oak desk dominated the center of the room. Eliza started her search there, her hands moving quickly and methodically. She checked drawers, feeling for false bottoms. She ran her hands along the underside of the desk. Nothing. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for something out of place. A loose floorboard, a brick in the fireplace. She noticed a series of heavy wooden panels on one wall, a sort of decorative wainscoting. They looked old, but not as old as the rest of the house. They seemed to have been installed recently. She felt along the seams of the panels, her fingers searching for a latch or a keyhole. Her heart sank. It was all solid. There was no way to get in. She was about to give up when her eyes fell on a small, unassuming book on one of the shelves. It was a copy of the Bible, bound in a worn leather cover. The spine was faded, the pages yellowed with age. It seemed innocuous, but its very presence in a room full of secular texts felt wrong. She took it down. It was a heavy book, but when she opened it, she realized it was hollowed out. A small key lay inside, its metal cold against her fingers. It was an old key with a strange twisting design. Eliza's breath hitched. A key, not a physical poison, but the key to a truth that would kill him. She turned her attention back to the paneled wall. She ran her fingers along the seams again, this time with a new purpose. She found it, a tiny, almost invisible keyhole, hidden within the grain of the wood. The decorative carvings on the panel were a feigned relief, a small, intricate deception. With a trembling hand, she inserted the key. It turned with a satisfying click, and the entire panel swung inward, revealing a small, dark closet. It was not a closet for clothes, but for secrets. A single, heavy wooden chest sat on the floor, locked with a thick iron latch. She had no key for this. She heard footsteps outside the study. Panic flared in her chest. It was Henry, his voice a low, urgent murmur. He was talking to himself, or perhaps to Mr. Thorne, who was likely in a state of a quiet frenzy. "Silas, you can't be serious," Henry was saying. "You think she's a threat? The little house girl? You're being paranoid. This is why we have a problem. You're constant." His voice trailed off as he entered the study. Eliza was trapped. The secret room was open, the chest in her view, but she couldn't get to it. She was standing in the open, her body a silhouette against the dark closet. She had to think fast. She ducked behind a large velvet armchair, holding her breath. Henry stood in the center of the room, his eyes scanning the space. He didn't seem to notice the open panel. He was looking for Mr. Thorne. "Silas, where are you? This is ridiculous. I'm not playing this game." Eliza saw her chance. She slipped from behind the chair, not toward the open door, but toward the desk. She grabbed the large metal paperweight from the surface, and with all her strength, she threw it against the wall opposite the closet. The heavy weight struck the wall with a loud, resounding thud. Henry whirled around, his eyes wide with surprise. What was that? Eliza didn't wait. She moved, not to the secret room, but to the other side of the desk, distracting him from the real prize. The sound of the paperweight hitting the wall was a deliberate misdirection, a distraction. "Someone's in here," Henry shouted, pulling a small silver-plated pistol from his coat. He was no longer the charming speculator. He was a cornered rat. His paranoia was as real as Mr. Thorne's. The fear of being exposed, the fear of being betrayed. He ran to the door, his eyes scanning the hallway. "Silas, we have a problem. The girl, she's not alone." The house was now a pressure cooker of mutual suspicion and terror. Eliza, still hidden, knew the clock was ticking. She had found the secret room, but she didn't have the key to the chest. The poisoned feast was about to reach its main course, and everyone, including Henry, was now on the menu. Henry's shout brought Mr. Thorne rushing downstairs, a dressing gown thrown over his nightshirt, his face pale with a sickly green pallor. The mild sedative had done its work, turning his paranoia into a full-blown frenzy. He saw Eliza standing by the desk, a small smile on her face, and his rage turned to pure, unadulterated fear. "You," he croaked, his voice a rattling gasp. "You poisoned me. You're just like her, just like Margot." "No, Master Thorne," Eliza said, her voice calm and steady. "I didn't poison you. I just made you paranoid. just like Henry does. Henry's head snapped toward her, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "What are you talking about?" "She's playing us, Henry," Mr. Thorne shouted, his eyes darting between Eliza and his partner. "She's lying. She's with them, the ones who want to expose us." "There are no them, Silas," Henry said, his tone a mix of exasperation and building fear. "It's just the girl." "Is it?" Eliza challenged, her voice raising to be heard over the two men. "Or is it the truth? The truth about the land deals. The truth about the people who ran away. The truth that Henry is getting ready to leave you to take his share and leave you here to face the consequences alone." The lie was a poison of its own, a calculated risk designed to turn them against each other. It worked. Mr. Thorne's gaze shifted from Eliza to Henry. The fear in his eyes turned to a cold, burning hatred. "You said you'd be here," he snarled at Henry. "You said you'd finish the deal together." "And I will," Henry stammered, his facade of charm crumbling under the pressure. "But you're a madman, Silas. You're letting a simple housegirl get in your head." "She's not simple," Thorne shrieked. "She found the key. She found the secret room." Henry's eyes, now wide with terror, darted to the hidden panel in the wall. It was still ajar. He saw the open closet, the empty space where the chest should have been. A cold, dreadful realization dawned on his face. "Where is it?" Henry hissed, his voice low and menacing. "Where's the ledger?" Eliza didn't flinch. "I don't know," she said, a small, knowing smile on her face. "But Jeremiah knows, and he knows where you buried the bodies." This was the final piece of her gambit, the one lie that was also the truth. She didn't have the ledger, but she knew someone who did. She knew where Jeremiah was, and she knew he had the power to reveal the truth. Henry's face went white. The thought of Jeremiah, a silent witness, a living account of their crimes, was too much. The fear of being exposed, of being found out, was a poison that paralyzed him. Henry's mind was racing. He had to act. He lunged for Eliza. Mr. Thorne, in his paranoid state, thought Henry was attacking him. He grabbed a heavy book from the desk and swung it at Henry's head. The two men, once allies in a conspiracy of murder and greed, turned on each other. The psychological torment had finally reached a breaking point. The poison she had fed them wasn't in their food. It was in their minds, in the fear and suspicion that had festered between them all along. Eliza used the chaos to her advantage. She had one goal: escape. She ran from the study and into the night. She heard the shouts and the thuds from inside the house. The sound of their self-destruction was a terrible, beautiful symphony. She had set the stage for their downfall. Now she had to find Jeremiah. He was the final player. He was the one who held the key, the real ledger, the one that could finally expose the entire macabre history. The night air was a cold shock against Eliza's skin as she fled the main house. The sounds of the men fighting faded behind her, replaced by the hooting of an owl and the frantic chirping of unseen crickets. She ran towards the stables, the place where Jeremiah had found his solace, the only place she could think of where he would be. He was there, sitting on an overturned bucket in the tack room, a lantern casting a pale, flickering light on his face. He didn't look up as she entered. He was whittling a small bird from a piece of wood, a twin to the one Margot had left in the kitchen. "It's over," Eliza said, her voice breathless. "They're destroying each other." Jeremiah didn't react. He just kept carving, his large hands working with a delicate, practiced precision. "They always do," he said, his voice as flat and empty as a stone. "Men like them. They build on lies, and when the lies crack, the whole structure comes down. They think they're strong, but they're weak. The weakest men I ever knew." "We have to go," Eliza urged, her fear and urgency a stark contrast to his calm. "We have to get the ledger and leave, now, before they turn on us." Jeremiah finished his carving, placing the tiny bird next to him. He then reached into a sack of feed, pulling out a small, crudely bound leather book. It was not a ledger. It was a sketchbook. "This is it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This is the real poison. This is the truth." He opened the book and held it up to the light. The pages were filled with detailed, horrifying sketches. A man's face, contorted in fear. A body, wrapped in a blanket, being dragged through the woods. The precise location of a grave, marked by a single peculiar-looking tree. A series of them, like a macabre map of the plantation. The drawings were unsettlingly realistic, drawn with a precise artistic hand. Jeremiah was not just a gravedigger. He was an artist, a chronicler, a forced witness. This was the ghost's burden. He didn't just dig the graves, he had to remember every detail. He had to make it real in his mind and on the page. "He made me do it," Jeremiah said, his voice hollow. "He made me draw them, everyone. He called it his history, a history of my complicity, a history of his power. He told me if I ever told anyone, he would show this to the world. He would show them what I am, what I've been forced to do." Eliza looked at the drawings, her stomach turning. She had suspected as much, but seeing it was a different kind of horror. It was a psychological torment, a perversion of art, turning it into a tool of blackmail and control. The poison was not the truth itself, but the way it was used to inflict pain. He wanted Margot to feel the same way, Jeremiah continued. He wanted her to know that no matter what she wrote, no matter how much she tried to expose him, he had the ultimate proof. He had the proof of her complicity. He showed me what she was writing. Her entries were small, concise, like a recipe. She thought she was building a case against him, but he knew she was building one against herself. He showed me the poison she had used on him, the one she had been collecting, the one she had used to make him sick that morning. Eliza's mind reeled. Margot had used the same sedative. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a plan. Margot hadn't been an idiot. She had been a brilliant, meticulous plotter. She had used Thorne's own paranoia against him. She had used her own poison to confirm his suspicions, knowing that the truth would only come out if someone else continued her work. And she had left her ledger, not as a finished testament, but as a roadmap for someone else to follow. "She wanted you to find this," Jeremiah said, holding up the sketchbook. "She said the only way to kill a poisoned man is with a mirror. The only way to win is to turn their own game against them, to show the world the monster he is, and the monster he created." Eliza looked at the drawings again. She saw the faces of the disappeared, the faces of the victims, and she saw the face of the man who had been forced to bury them. The real poison was not in the food or in a ledger. It was in the human heart, twisted and corrupted by power. And the cure was in this book, in the sketches of a man's crimes, drawn by the very man who was forced to cover them up. "We have to go," Eliza said again, this time with a new, fierce resolve. "We have to get this to the authorities. This is the evidence. This is the poison that will kill him. This is the truth that will set us free." The moonlight glinted off the pages of the sketchbook, revealing a macabre history. A history of a man who poisoned people's lives for his own gain, and the slave who would finally feed the truth to the world. The silence was broken by the distant, furious shouts from the main house. The fight between Mr. Thorne and Henry had devolved into a violent, desperate struggle. They were like two rabid dogs, tearing each other apart. Eliza and Jeremiah knew they had to move, and they had to move fast. They had the evidence, the poisoned sketchbook, but they were still on Thorne's land, a place where the law held no sway over a powerful man. "The nearest town is 5 miles west," Jeremiah said, his voice low and steady. "There's a constable there, a good man. He's been looking into the disappearances, but he has no proof. We get this to him and it's over." They began to run, their movements a swift, silent blur in the darkness. The path was uneven, the roots of the trees a constant threat to their footing. They heard the sound of galloping horses behind them. Mr. Thorne had a few loyal overseers, men who were as complicit in his crimes as Henry and Jeremiah had been. He had sicked them on the two people who held the key to his destruction. "They're coming for us," Eliza whispered, her heart pounding. "Let them," Jeremiah said, his face a mask of grim determination. "We know this land. They don't." They veered off the path, into a thicket of tangled underbrush. The branches tore at their skin, but they kept moving. They were no longer just two people running from a madman. They were the truth, fleeing from the lie. The chase was a physical manifestation of the psychological war that had been raging for weeks. The final battle for the poisoned feast. They reached the creek. The water was shallow, but the current was fast. Its sound a low, steady roar. Eliza remembered Margot's entry. "The creek runs red." This was the place where the victims were buried. This was where the poisoned history had been kept secret. "We cross here," Jeremiah said, pointing to a small, rickety-looking bridge made of 2 logs. "They'll have to go around. We'll gain time." They made it to the other side just as the horses emerged from the trees. The overseers were there, their faces lit by the pale moonlight, their guns raised. "Stop!" one of them yelled. "Drop the book and stop and we won't have to hurt you." "The book is the only reason you can't hurt us," Eliza yelled back. "The book is the truth." The overseers hesitated for a moment. They were not men of great intelligence. They were men of violence and cruelty, but they were not so foolish as to miss the implication of her words. The book was a weapon. The truth was a shield. They were caught. "Fire!" one of them finally yelled, his voice a frantic mixture of fear and rage. A gunshot cracked through the air. A bullet whizzed past Eliza's head, so close she could feel the wind from it. Jeremiah grabbed her, pulling her down behind a large boulder. "We have to split up," he yelled over the sound of the water. "They'll follow me. You keep going. Get the book to the constable, now." Eliza didn't want to leave him. He had been her ally, her guide. But she knew he was right. She had to do this alone. The truth had to be delivered. The poisoned history had to be revealed. She grabbed the sketchbook, holding it tight against her chest, and took off into the woods, leaving Jeremiah to face the overseers alone. She didn't look back. She ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, the pages of the sketchbook rustling against her chest. She had the key to a man's destruction. She had Margot's legacy. She had Jeremiah's burden. She had the poisoned feast. The town was a small cluster of wooden buildings, their windows dark, the streets empty. It was late, but a single light was on in the sheriff's office. Eliza ran to the door and pounded on it, her heart a drumbeat of desperation. A man's voice, groggy with sleep, came from inside. "Who is it?" "It's Eliza," she yelled, her voice hoarse from running. "From the Thorne plantation. You have to help me. I have proof of the disappearances." The door opened a crack. A kind-faced man in a sheriff's uniform looked out, his eyes wide with surprise. "Eliza? What is it, girl? What's going on?" She shoved the sketchbook into his hands. "It's all in here," she said, her voice trembling with exhaustion and relief. "The truth about Master Thorne, the people who disappeared, the land deals. It's a poisoned history." The sheriff, Constable Miller, looked at the book, his brow furrowed. He opened it, his eyes scanning the horrifying drawings, the sketches of the bodies, the maps of the graves. His own name was scrawled on one of the pages. He had a brother who had vanished months ago, a man who had gone to the Thorne plantation to do business and was never seen again. He was one of the victims. The truth had finally come home. Constable Miller looked at Eliza, his face a mask of shock and sorrow. "My God," he whispered, "all this time. It was him." Just then, two overseers burst into the street, their faces grim, their guns raised. They saw Eliza and the constable, and their expressions hardened. They were not just a threat now, they were witnesses. And the truth in the form of a sketchbook was right there. "Drop the book, Miller," one of them yelled. "It's a lie." "Is it?" the constable asked, his voice now cold and resolute. He held up the sketchbook. "This looks like the truth to me. A poisoned history, indeed. This is the evidence I needed." The overseers hesitated. They were used to taking orders from Mr. Thorne, to using violence to solve their problems. But this was different. This was the law. This was the poison they couldn't fight. "You're done, boys," the constable said, his hand resting on the pistol at his hip. "The game is over. The feast is finished." The overseers, realizing they were outmatched, dropped their guns and surrendered. The truth, in the form of a small, leather-bound book, had won. Eliza collapsed against the doorframe, her legs giving out. The relief was a wave, a powerful, cleansing force. She had done it. She had delivered the poisoned history. She had fulfilled Margot's legacy and Jeremiah's burden. The next morning, the constable, armed with the sketchbook and a warrant, rode out to the Thorne plantation. He found the main house in a state of chaos. Mr. Thorne was lying on the floor of his study, his head bleeding from a wound inflicted by a heavy paperweight. Henry was gone, having fled into the night when he realized the game was lost. The body of a stable hand, Jeremiah, was found in the woods, a bullet wound in his chest. But the sketchbook, the poison he had carried, had been delivered. His sacrifice had not been in vain. The legal proceedings were swift. The sketchbook was irrefutable evidence. Mr. Thorne, in his state of paranoid delirium, confessed to everything: the location of the bodies, the conspiracy with Henry. He was a man consumed by his own cruelty, a man who had built a life on secrets and lies, and in the end, it was the truth that finally killed him. The poisoned feast had been consumed, and the macabre history was finally, irrevocably over. Eliza, now a free woman, stood on a hill overlooking the plantation. It was a place of ghosts, not of the supernatural kind, but of the human kind. The ghosts of the men and women who had vanished. The ghosts of Margot and Jeremiah, the ghosts of a poisoned history. She would carry their memory with her forever. The horror was not in the unknown, but in the all-too-human capacity for evil. And the victory was not in a miraculous rescue, but in the simple, powerful act of speaking the truth. She had fed the world a poisoned history, and in doing so, she had found her freedom.